My name's Derek Guffey. I have been with ConstructConnect for about 18 years, rolling up on my anniversary next month. Prior to this, I practiced architecture. I went to the School of Architecture at University of Kentucky. Um, Went back home to Indiana to start my career in architecture. Started out in a firm called Woolen Molson and Partners, where we designed a lot of churches. We did a lot of libraries, performing arts centers, and we always said we designed the buildings that lasted 100 years, not 30. So had a great experience there. Um, um, that during the kind of retraction in the market, that firm ended up closing, and I went over to a firm called CSO in Indianapolis and was in their higher education studio. Um, Realized that I was becoming very good at detailing buildings, and when you're an architect, maybe that's not the greatest place to be. It's changing the world one door jam at a time, is what I always say. I was looking to be more involved with the promotion of the firm, the design aspects of a firm, and realized that I might be better suited working in more of a sales capacity. So I started looking, and I looked at several building product manufacturers, um, and ultimately ended up with ConstructConnect. And I thought it was I've always said it. I felt more valuable as an architect at ConstructConnect than I ever did as an architect. And one of the reasons is that experience I gained as an architect allowed me a unique position to connect building product manufacturers with the architectural community and the design community. It also gave me a deep understanding of how the choreography of design occurs, and how to effectively coach building product manufacturers through the use of the ConstructConnect information and platforms to connect more strategically and effectively, and drive better revenues for their business. So yeah, that's how I got my start here. It's been a strange path, but I lead the sales team over here now. I'm a vice president of sales for the manufacturer segment, which really means we take the full portfolio of products for ConstructConnect. We consultatively work with building product manufacturers, find out what's slowing down their business, and then we take tools that can use both data and analytics to really drive and drive better strategic alignment for them, connect them better to the environment they're working in, and ultimately drive and alleviate bottlenecks for their business, and drive more revenue. So that's what I'm doing now. I think getting your product specified is boy, it is the ante to the game, right? And without it, you have an uphill battle throughout the entire process of design. I always coach people to be consultative, and we'll talk a little bit more about that the later we get into this interview. But um, to get specified, you have to be trusted. You have to protect that architect from liability. Architects carry more liability insurance than doctors do. I always say they can kill hundreds at a time, as opposed to a doctor who can kill one at a time. It's a morbid statement, but very accurate, right? So architects are constantly worried about liability, and the job of a building product manufacturer is to really understand their industry and their product well enough to protect that architect to ultimately get them specified. Specifications are really the cookbook, the quality control cookbook of a building. It's how architects and engineers really control the quality of their design and ensure that the building that they're delivering to the owner is going to be one that functions well, that's long lasting, that is beautiful, that responds to all of the treatment it's going to get over its life cycle, and then ultimately at the end, how does that refurbish itself, and go back from a sustainability standpoint. So specifications allow the architect to control that. They're going to evaluate products based on those qualities and ensure that all of that is met. It protects the owner, it protects the general contractor, it protects the designer for long-term liability. So that's a key reason why you got to get specified. It varies from public work to private work. You know, a building product manufacturer on a private job, the architect can say, "Hey, I want to use this product," and it's easy peasy. We choose that product, and they can go about their day. On public work, though, they're asked to choose multiple products for the same opportunity, so that there's not a bias. So it's a neutral playing ground for folks, and that presents some challenges for a lot of manufacturers, right? How do you compete and differentiate yourself while staying neutral? So we have ways to help people do that at ConstructConnect, and architects have to be acceptable of other products, you know, during the specification process, excuse me, when they're picking. If they choose one company, they have to be willing to accept others too. So that it requires a great deal of research on their behalf. Without that, when it comes to bid time, you really can't participate if you're not in that spec or been approved by an architect to compete. So if you want to provide numbers and ultimately win that job during the bidding stage, if you're not spec'd, you can't play. So when I say ante to the game, it really is. If you're not there, you're going to have a real long uphill battle to achieve that. Yeah, what can you do to get specified more effectively? I love this topic. I love talking about this topic. Um, I never talk through the lens of ConstructConnect, but because our products are purpose built to address a lot of this, I feel it's more important to really coach people out on how to do this effectively, and our products kind of solve those problems and give them ways to do that, regardless. So I always tell people, consultation is the key to success, and consultation early in the design process is what's going to get you way ahead of the game. There's three variables that I always coach people to focus on. Liability, we kind of talked about a minute ago. Time, and the third would be cost, right? So liability, time, and cost. All of your go-to-market activity should be focused around those three core elements. And I want to spend some time on time, because if you think about an architect, they're on billable hours, right? And any time they devote to you is billable, and it has to go towards some project. So their time is very valuable, and they are people of need. So they don't. If you can imagine yourself as a building product manufacturer's rep, they're probably making close to 20,000 specification decisions on any given project. So we just talked about public bidding, where for each product they select, they got to kind of review 3 acceptable manufacturers. So if you magnify that over 20,000 pieces, they're looking at a lot of product reps trying to get a hold of them. So I always coach people, use data to strategically understand where a project's at in its process. Don't waste an architect's time by calling them in the very early stages during master planning or very early schematic design, because quite frankly, they're not thinking about what type of roof they're going to use right now. They're thinking more big picture at that point. But if you can understand that they will eventually get to stages like design development and working drawings, where they're making a lot of those really important specification decisions, that's when you need to strategically insert yourself into the process. So be very focused and tactical with your time when you're reaching out to those individuals. They will give it to you if they need you for a reason. So you have, in your time and outreach, you have to also be effective with that time. Your response time has to be is imperative, right? If they're calling you with a question about your product, or your industry and you don't respond to them, they're going to move on to the next person. So we want to not only be strategic, but available for those questions and consultative to solve those industry questions and questions about your product during those critical times during design development, working drawings, when they're making those selections. They're also, they're working 80 hours a week, a lot of them. So you got to find time to build relationships with them outside of their normal workday. I always encourage people to join CSI and AIA and go to these events socially to build collaboration with those folks, build trust. You want to be the manufacturer's rep that when they have a question about the industry, regardless of what project it's on, that you're the first person they call. So you got to build that trust, and with that trust, you start to gain that trust in the protection of liability. If you want a quick exit to an architectural firm, get them sued once, right? They will blackball you from now to the end of time if you underperform on a job and put them in a situation of litigation. So know your product, know the ins and outs of your product, know where it's vulnerable, help them with their details, help them with their specifications, right? Architects go to school to be architects. They're not being educated on what makes a good roofing assembly, what's going to keep water out of the building using a specific material. There's just too many products and new technologies out there for them to keep on top of. So you have to be that trusted resource from a liability standpoint to really allow them to choose your product with confidence and put that into their building. Data can help on both of those fronts, right? Like if you think about the ConstructConnect information and software, we allow you to slice and dice projects and company information so that you can navigate those waters on when's the right time to reach out to an architect. When should you be, or who are they connected with? Who are you? Who do you need to influence? Many building product manufacturers, their avenue to success is through lunch and learns. They take an opportunity, go buy lunch for a firm to build relationships and become that consultative resource. They will also walk into them and there'll be 30 architects sitting in the room. Maybe not all of them at the time that you're going in there for that lunch and learn will have relevance, but if you have data to know which architects to talk to and what stage of design those projects are in, you can leave that lunch and learn and make sure that you have spoken and reached out to each of those individuals during that time. It just makes you much more effective, much more available. And as they look back in a few weeks when the food's digested and they've moved on from your lunch and learn, those tips and tricks that you've left with them, that consultative expertise that you've provided them, they'll refer back to on time, and that data can really make you effective in maximizing those. Cost is that third one I mentioned. I think the more transparent you can be in the decisions early in design and open with helping in the design process prevents getting value engineered later on. You can do everything right and get specified and provide all the consultation you want in the world, but if your price isn't right at the end, or you change your price and elevate it come bid date, that's going to sting that architect and they're going to look beyond you. But if you're a part of the solution and you're there as a collaborative partner and helping them make those design decisions through exposure of your cost early, I think that's just a great tactic to allow them to protect you during the bidding stage and look for reasons why to keep you as products are ultimately being chosen and submitted for that final project. So consultation early and often. Tactically, though, I think that's very important. Got to build those relationships, focus on liability, time, and cost, and that will drive success. The other thing and I don't want to underestimate this, the way projects are being delivered now is changing. We've typically experienced this common design, bid, and build delivery mechanism, which is kind of a waterfall approach, right? We do all the drawings, we do all the specifications, we put it out to bid, and then the building gets built. Well, that's changing. I think just like software, we're moving to a much more agile design approach where things are being released for construction in this fast track methodology, more of a design build mentality. Construction managers and GCs are having such a strong influence on the constructability parts of the design, which leads to much greater influence on the products that are chosen. So we have to adapt to that, and I'm coaching a lot of manufacturers now to diversify their go-to-market. One of the ways they can do that is I call it triangulation. They're going to have to start selling on multiple fronts. It can't just be that we're going out to influence architects in the design community anymore. You have to really open that aperture and include go-to-market positioning for general contractors and CMs, as well as start to build networks of trusted subcontractors that are going to install those products for you. I think I always say, if you can connect with two elements, whether it be the owner and the architect, or the architect and the GC, as long as you have two out of the three in that triangle between the contractor, the owner, and the designer, you have a greater opportunity of success, because two will almost always influence the third and ultimately get your product specified, but more importantly, chosen at the end. So you need to diversify your go-to-market and understand who's working with who from a relationship standpoint. Our software, ConstructConnect, is perfectly suited to do that. A lot of people chase projects in our service by looking for project information, but I think the real smart building product manufacturers approach it more from a company-centric view. And that allows them to connect all those dots to understand who's working with who's historically worked with who we anticipate working with who on a project, and gaining the visibility they need to maximize the go-to-market outreach for that manufacturer's rep, right? To be able to go out there and know, okay, who do I need to talk to and who do I need to triangulate with? If you do that, paired with what we talked about, consultative excellence early in design, you're really set up for success. I think the most successful manufacturers that we see take data and analytics and enable those people, those manufacturers reps, direct reps, enable them to do those things effectively during pre-construction. I was working on a library at Asbury College in Wilmore, Kentucky, and we had done a computer lab for them. And in that computer lab, we had been approached by an access flooring company. And as an architect, we assumed that when the rep came in and talked to us, that if you're familiar with access flooring, there's pedestals that raise up these panels that allow wires and conduit to go underneath the floor. And then on top of it sits carpet tile. Well, in this scenario, we had specified a product, but unbeknownst to us as architects, because of a deficient manufacturer's rep, that we weren't informed that the carpet tiles that sit on top of the panels were made by one company. The little rubber fasteners that were adhered to the back of the carpet company were made by another company. The panels were made by another company, and the pedestals were made by a fourth company. Sold as an assembly, but each of those components were manufactured by different entities. So when we get to the job and start to look at the floor, there was gaps between the carpet that you could put about 5 quarters in between. Of course, the owner was upset. We as specifiers were upset, and we're getting blamed for really not doing due diligence during the specification process to understand that when we got to this position of liability where someone's looking to correct this issue, the installer said it was the pedestal guy not putting the pedestals in the right place. The pedestal guy was complaining that the tiles weren't in tolerance, and then the carpet guy was also after the panel guy because those weren't in tolerance either. So everyone's pointing the finger at the other person, but no one was stepping up to take responsibility. So in that case, that is a great example of, had I been a manufacturer's rep and had been more educational and more had positioned myself to help the specifier understand what the risks were, and it would have eliminated a lot of finger pointing and solved this problem. May have not solved the problem if we'd have still chosen that product, but at least we'd all been on the same page and without having to do extensive research to find out where the fault should lie. Ultimately, what that did was that company was blackballed. We never used them again. And so when I talk about liability, cost, and time, all three were affected there in a bad way. And so that's a good example to learn from, I think. I always say architects are a little good at a lot, but not a lot of good at a little. They are generalists by nature, is probably a more eloquent way to say that. They are not educated on all these products, and I think our ability as a product manufacturer to serve as this consultative resource is so important. We've created a nice document in collaboration at ConstructConnect with the AIA. It's called the Architect's Journey to Specification, and that can be found on the ConstructConnect website. We can provide some details on that, but it really it's a nice playbook for manufacturers talking about the importance of consultative engagement, strategic engagement, and these designers really value these relationships. I still stay in contact with manufacturers reps, and I'm 18 years out of the profession. I think they become friends, they become trusted allies for you, and I think through the use of data and analytics, you as a manufacturer can really focus in on all of these tools we've talked about, consultation early through and focus on liability, time, and cost, and then triangulating to make sure that you're not chasing a project for 4 years only to lose it at the end. We want to ensure that we've tightened the chain on any point that we could potentially lose a job through connectivity, and that's what you're going to find using data to do that. So it's a hard business. I know no one grows up thinking, boy, this is the industry I'm going to end up in. But those that do, I think, really appreciate it, know how hard it is, know how complex the sales process is, how long it can be, and how much heart and soul you can pour into it. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it great. And I think with some of those tips and tricks, you can sure do that.